everyone, and welcome to Techstrong TV. Today is Monday, October 17th, and I hope you all are having a wonderful day so far. I'm your host, William. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Techstrong TV. Today is Monday, October 17th, and I hope you all are having a wonderful day so far. I'm your host, William Willis, and in today's show, we're going to bring you some fantastic interviews with incredible guests from around the world. So stay tuned. As always, I'm going to start off with our Techstrong News Recap, filling you in on the biggest tech headlines that are making waves. Then we go over to Alan, where he speaks with Kapil Thangavelu, co-founder and CTO at Stacklit, where they will talk about how the CNCF Technical Oversight Committee has voted to accept Cloud Custodian as a CNCF incubating project. Alan will then speak to Brad Arkin, Senior Vice President and Chief Security and Trust Officer at Cisco, to discuss the RSA Conference's ESAF report. We're then joined by our very own Cody J. Brown, who will hop on to tell us more about some of the upcoming webinars we have for you. We then go to Open Source Summit Europe, where Mike met with Benoit Janssen, Enterprise Architect for RTE, and Jonas van den Boogaard, Solution Architect and Open Source Advocate for Alliander, to discuss how the Open Source LF Energy Foundation is working to reduce carbon emissions. Also at Open Source Summit Europe, Mike interviews Sal Kimmich, Head of Developer Relations for Sonatype, as Sal explains how gender biases adversely affect software development. Next up, we are airing episode 2 of our series, Engineering the Change. This series will follow the 3 winners of the Engineering the Change Scholarship Program as they tackle a 10-week intensive coding boot camp and prepare themselves for careers in software engineering. We will then wrap up this broadcast with 2 episodes of View with Vizard. Mike will first speak to CIQ CEO Gregory Kurtzler, as Gregory explains why the Rocky Linux is gaining traction at the expense of other Linux distributions. Then Mike interviews Invicti CTO and Head of Cybersecurity Research, Frank Catucci, as Frank explains why so many developers knowingly ship vulnerabilities in their code. And that's what we have coming up for you on this episode of Techstrong TV. So without further ado, let's get the show started. Enjoy. Hi again, everyone. Here are the headlines for October 17th. First up, after 2 weeks of obtaining data, NASA's announced that its Double Asteroid Redirection Test, or DART, successfully altered the asteroid Dimorphos' orbit. This marks the first time humanity has ever purposely changed the motion of a celestial object. NASA originally stated that the mission would be a success if the orbit was changed by 73 seconds or more. Since the collision occurred on September 26th, NASA has used telescopes to measure that DART altered the asteroid by 32 minutes, more than 25 times longer than the benchmark for success. While on the topic of space, Amazon has announced that it plans to launch its prototype internet satellites early next year. The satellites, Kuipersat-1 and Kuipersat-2, will be riding into orbit on a Vulcan Centaur rocket from the United Launch Alliance in early 2023. The company has stated that the launch will let it perform tests on satellite network technology and help finalize the design for their commercial satellite system. This announcement marks a delay from Amazon since it was originally planning to launch in late 2022. Zooming out, Amazon has permission to send up over 3,000 satellites to connect people to broadband, as it wants to compete with SpaceX's Starlink systems. Next up, after 15 years of being commercial-free, Netflix has announced the price and rollout of its ad-supported service. The service, which will debut on November 3rd, will cost $7, a price undercutting most other ad-supported streaming services like Disney+. According to the announcement, every hour of viewing will equate to about 4 to 5 minutes of ads. The move to create an ad-supported version comes after Netflix announced its first loss in subscribers in more than a decade earlier this year. Netflix hopes that with its new low-priced option, it will stand out in a market that is rife with inflation and competition from other streaming services. In other news, researchers have grown brain cells that have learned to play the 1970s video game, Pong. The researchers grew mini brains and then connected them to the game using electrodes. According to the researchers, the mini brain learned to play in under 5 minutes. But this being said, it did often miss the ball, but it was hitting the ball well above random chance. The mini brains were originally created back in 2013 to study genetic disorders, but have since been used to research into brain development. The researchers hope that with the breakthroughs like this and others like them, they will eventually be able to create treatments for neurodegenerative disorders. On Digital CXO, we have an article looking at the growth of the metaverse that is expected to occur over the next decade. While the market size for the metaverse in 2021 reached $22.9 billion, by 2030 it is expected to reach $996 billion. While the metaverse offers a lot on its own, how it interacts with other technologies is the key to its value. To learn more, go to digitalcxo.com. On Container Journal, we have an article looking at Microsoft's announcement of the ability to deploy Azure Kubernetes services from the cloud to the network edge. With this new capability, it promises it will make it simpler to synchronize the management of AKS across multiple platforms. To learn more about this new feature, as well as a handful of other new features and updates announced at Ignite 2022, go to containerjournal.com. Finally, on DevOps.com, we have an article that looks at how to secure GraphQL. Many organizations are hesitant to adopt GraphQL since there is no clear method to handle authorization concerns. Without a role-based access layer, the query language can cause control issues. This article looks at some of the common GraphQL threats and some solutions and best practices to fix it. To learn more, go to devops.com. And that's today's Techstrong News Recap.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Techstrong TV segment. I'm really happy to be joined by Kapil Thangavelu. And if I mispronounced it, I apologize, but I gave it my best shot. Kapil, we close?
We're good.
Good, man. Thank you. So Kapil is with, Kapil, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I am the co-founder of Stacklet and the creator and lead maintainer for Cloud Custodian.
Excellent. We're going to talk a lot about Cloud Custodian in this interview, Kapil, but I want to get out of the way first, though, a little bit about Stacklet.
Sure. So
what do you guys do?
So Stacklet is a company of which I'm CTO that we created in March of 2020 to help enterprises adopt Cloud Custodian at scale and to help sort of further its feature development and capability set. So bringing sort of the out-of-the-box value to organizations that they would otherwise have to do toil on with the open source, as well as to help lead and direct features and roadmap around the open source.
Excellent. And is that stacklet.io for people who want to get more information?
That is.
STACKLET.
Indeed. .io. And so a lot of what we do is we build on top of the open source to build out a platform for executing, doing governance as code at scale, at enterprise scale with UX, visualization, reporting. We also build some additional components and capabilities for driving real-time asset inventories across the cloud, as well as being able to do richer enterprise integrations from ServiceNow, Jira, et cetera, to being able to drive some of the behavior change capabilities of Cloud Custodian into the enterprise.
Very good. And really, this is a model that we've seen become popular, especially with the rise and advent of like CNCF and Linux Foundation and so forth. Is you have a company in the old days before you had foundations. A company like this would manage the open source project themselves, and it was hard for the open source projects to get scale because potential competitors and consumers and stuff would be worried about, well, it was kind of a big brother approach to managing these open source projects. These open source projects were managed sometimes for the sole benefit of the sponsor, if you will, right? And now with Linux Foundation, Cloud Native Computing Foundation, CDF, others, you have much more of a real community that can coalesce behind these projects while still affording a company like Stacklet the ability to offer, in some cases, call it a commercial version or an open core kind of freemium version, as well as additional resources and services that allow some of these open source projects to, as you say, operate at scale, operate, in the enterprise, if you will. And it really, this is the model today. We didn't have this 15 years ago, 10 years ago.
Yeah, I've been involved in open source for 25 years now, and I've seen lots of different motions in ecosystems. Project level foundations to umbrella organizations in the form of Apache, and it's a lot of that's old is come again, let's say, but I think the key aspects for us, at least with Cloud Custodian, is that it is a successful open source project, independent, prior to its movement into CNCF with hundreds of contributors. Being in CNCF has helped accelerate that. And, now we have over 350 contributors, a dozen maintainers from a half dozen companies. And so that's really helped, I think, solidify, being in the foundation has helped solidify that notion of a neutral home. And so we have competitors that are using the open source. We have lots of end user customers that feel empowered to contribute that the underlying capability set isn't going to, be tied to the fate of a single organization. And at Stacklet, we very much believe in open source. And so we're not necessarily just doing an open core play. The policy language that we give our customers is the exact same that is available in the open source. What we do is provide sort of the operations, the maintenance, the monitoring, the visualizations, and richer capability sets around it. But that core policy language that we drive for governance as code is foundationally derived from the open source and is the same as the open source.
Excellent, man. So I want to talk about the news with CNCF in 1 second. I just want to make sure people are clear. Stacklet is stacklet.io. For people who want to go to the community site for the, quote unquote, pure open source, cloudcustodian.io is the right site for that.
That's correct. That is correct. Okay. And we're also, primarily in GitHub and discussions and Slack, but a simple Google should find it, should take you on a video.
Turn them all up.
Yeah,
absolutely. All right. So the news, or some of the news we want to talk about today, is that Cloud Custodian has now been accepted into CNCF as an incubation project, or as a project in incubation. I'm not sure quite what the wording is there.
Incubating, I think, is the phrase, or maybe
it's the verb.
I guess I've seen both.
To incubate.
Yeah. I've seen both, so it's hard to say.
I got it. I tripped on it too. But I mean, for those who are familiar with cloud computing, Cloud Native Computing Foundation, the Linux Foundation, or open source sort of models, basically there's 3 or 4 stages that a project goes in or passes through, hopefully, as part of a project managed by CNCF. I think the first one is called Sandbox.
That's correct.
And that's really early on, and things are getting started. Then there's incubation, which, and there are, objective metrics that a project must meet to land into these stages. But the next one up is incubation, where obviously they're growing the project and it's being incubated. And then eventually projects graduate. And there's only been a handful of projects that actually have reached the graduation tier of CNCF. I believe Prometheus is probably one of them. Linkerd might be another. I think Kubernetes, and there's others. But in any event, incubation is where a lot of projects kind of spend probably the greatest amount of time. But it's not Sandbox. It's not that this baby's premature in an incubator or something. Incubation generally means you have a project that has some pretty solid foundational, as you mentioned, 350 contributors and multiple maintainers and across, geographies and corporations and organizations. So that's a pretty big deal to reach that level. Kapil, what do you think it means? What do you think it means for the project from this point on?
So it's interesting to contrast sort of Cloud Custodian's journey, because I think it's a little bit unique for some of the CNCF projects, in the sense that it was, a mature production used by thousands of global brands for cloud governance, even before it went into CNCF. Being in the CNCF has, given us that umbrella, as we referenced earlier, to have that neutral home, and it's helped accelerate some of our growth and our adoption as organizations that are already members of the CNCF feel freer to contribute to it, and newer organizations that are becoming aware of it feel comfortable adopting it in production from the get-go. But last year we hosted a Cloud Custodian Day, and we had HPO Max and JPMC talk, and others talk about sort of their production usage at scale of Cloud Custodian, and we're actually hosting another one of those shortly, Cloud Custodian Day 2022 on October 18th, where we'll have additional speakers coming in, that including Intuit and Siemens and Databricks. So a lot of sort of production usage for multiple years, and hearing those stories from those users on how they're able to achieve some of their governance goals using Cloud Custodian. Moving into incubation in the CNCF is really helpful from unlocking sort of the capabilities of the CNCF, which is sort of what they help provide to the projects is based on where those projects are. If I look at the key metrics for where the different stages of CNCF, Custodian is an already mature project. We're looking forward. We're excited to be in incubating, but we're looking forward to graduation, because we feel like that's where we should be ultimately. And we're looking forward to presenting at KubeCon, taking advantage of some of the resources that CNCF unlocks for each of these different levels to help us reach more users and help establish as a de facto standard for cloud governance.
Cool. We should mention, later this month, I think it's the week of the 24th, is, of course, KubeCon, Cloud Native Con up in Detroit. And now as an official incubation project, the Cloud Custodian team will be there. Kapil, I'm not sure if you're planning on being there.
I plan on being there. We'll have both the Stacklet booth, and we'll also be the Cloud Custodian project will have a booth at the project pavilion, and we'll also be doing an event. We'll also have a few talks there. I think one on the contributor track, and we're also doing one on the Cloud Native Rejects Day on Sunday for those that are attending the day before. And I believe one other talk on sort of where the project is and sort of an intro and deep dive into some of its capabilities. So if you're interested and you're coming to KubeCon, please come check out the schedule. We'll also be hosting a fun event Tuesday evening at a local game/beer hall.
Cool. Yeah, there's lots of events going on. We had seen, we'll be there broadcasting live. So maybe we'll catch up while we're out there. I want to turn back, though, to the Cloud Custodian event, which is next week, I believe the 18th. For folks who are interested and want to maybe register, that's a virtual event, correct, Kapil?
That's correct. It's a virtual event, roughly from 9:30 to 3 to 4 o'clock Eastern.
Okay. For people who are interested in that, you can sign up. It's at cloudcustodian.io/events, which I think is kind of a Google Calendar for the community, but you can get to the link off of that. Again, cloudcustodian.io/events. Kapil, talk to us a little. You mentioned a bunch of user organizations are going to be talking about, how they're using Cloud Custodian to help them with their cloud governance. Anything else you want to share with the audience about the event?
Yeah, so we'll have a bunch of end users talking about how they're using Cloud Custodian to help them manage at scale across multiple public clouds. We'll also be previewing some of the newer capabilities that are part of the open source. And one of those is going to the three of highlight, which are going to be support for running policies on Terraform. So a shift left capability, being able to run both mutating and validating admission controllers against Kubernetes with custodian policies, and then additional support for new providers, specifically Tencent Cloud. So, and if you're interested in all those, we'll have some additional deep dives at Cloud Custodian Day.
Very good. Kapil, I think we hit most everything here. Is there anything we didn't?
No, this
is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, Alan Schimmel here for another Techstrong TV segment. I'm happy to be joined for this segment by Brad Arkin. And Brad's kind of wearing two hats on today's show. I'm going to ask him Brad, first of all, welcome to Techstrong TV.
Thank you.
So by day, Brad, you work with the good folks at Cisco, correct?
That's right. I'm the Chief Security and Trust Officer at Cisco.
Why don't we start there? What exactly does that entail?
Yeah, so I'm the security leader responsible for everything that happens within the company. And so that's the security of the products that we're building for our customers, the services that we operate, and then also all the back office work that's happening. And so within my team, I've got a Chief Information Security Officer, Chief Privacy Officer, we have a trust office, product security engineering, lots of other odds and ends, but those are the big pieces.
Absolutely. And that's a big job, right? It always used to surprise me when, at an event or something. I mean, security at Cisco, probably from a revenue perspective, was the biggest security company in the world for a very, very long time.
We've got the security business group. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, go ahead. I mean, you know better than I. The security business group is just a huge piece of the business. But to be clear, that's not what you're doing, right? You're not making security products that we're selling to the whole world. You're in charge of Cisco security.
Yeah, so the joke I make is the security business group makes the money and then I spend it. And so I'm cost center. So I don't have any revenue making. So for me, the security business group is just one of our business entities. And so we have lots of other businesses that are out there making money, doing enterprise networking or whatever it is that solves customer problems. And my job is to make sure that everything we're doing, whether it's security products or enterprise networking or collaboration, that these products are going to meet the security requirements of the environments in which they're deployed and operated. And then also all the back office infrastructure. Now, because we are a bunch of security experts within the security and trust org, we work closely with SPG in what we call customer zero. And so often we're using things that aren't yet out for customers, or we're giving lots of feedback on features that we think would help make the products more impactful for us as users. And then that does roll forward into what the customers do. But I don't run the security business group. That's a different team. They roll up to a different leader in our executive leadership team. So I'm definitely back office.
Got it. All right. So that's the day job. At night, or at least once a year, it used to be around February. This year it's April. You're also very closely involved with a group coming out of the RSA conference that's kind of gone public now, or come out of stealth. Why don't you tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah. So, in the old days, we would do this every Monday, the week of RSA conference, the ESAF, so Executive Security Action Forum. And this is roughly 100 of the security leaders, so CISOs, CSOs, that kind of crowd, would get together. And for us, it was a wonderful chance to kind of get away from the sales reps and all the chaos that happens on the expo floor at RSA and just get together in a room, and we'd have an agenda we'd go through. And it was security leaders sharing information, getting on stage, talking about topics. And usually, the hallway chat, what we talk about at lunch and after work, that was like the big highlight each year. And so with COVID, we've been meeting throughout the year. It's not just in person on that one Monday. And so we've been doing more work together to figure out how we can get more value out of this group that we've assembled.
It's funny, COVID was no joke, and there were a lot of people died. It's changed. It's changed the way we do things. I mean, even so I'm Jewish. We had Jewish holidays last week or the week before, and our synagogue live streams services. And even though people can still go now with COVID and everything, more people are watching the live stream than they are going in person. And it's not just where I go, but other churches and synagogues are experiencing the same thing. COVID's definitely changed. In this case, it facilitated a group that was meeting once a year into doing virtual meetings, but doing them much more often. And that probably, I'm assuming, had a big influence in the decision to kind of go public with this very first report from ESAF.
Yeah, so I think that, there's no way I could meet 6 times a year in person with this group of folks. I've got too much else going on. And so being able to figure out what do we have happening that we can do together when we're meeting together so frequently, and what are the increased ways we can add value for the membership. So that's something that it's really raised our ambition of what's possible now.
Excellent. I love it. It's good to see something good happen from all that suffering. So let's talk a little bit about ESAF and this kind of, you guys have agreed or decided to do a full-blown report. It's the first public report from ESAF, and it deals on communications with the board, correct?
That's right.
Give us a little more. That's as far as I can take it, Brad. Why don't you take it from there?
Yeah. I'll give you the overview. So basically, I've got my day job, and I lead a big team, and we've got a lot of deliverables and things that we care about. And then for me, it's quarterly, but for pretty much everyone who's in my job at big companies, they meet regularly with the board. It might be every other meeting, it might be quarterly, but when you sit down to talk with the board and give an update, you're trying to compress the activities of hundreds or thousands of people that have been working for months and try to get that down into a 15, 30, 45, 60-minute update. And it is so difficult to try to figure out how can you, as a subject matter expert that works on this stuff, 7 days a week, all day long, and how can you give an update to a bunch of folks who might be coming from backgrounds in finance or corporate governance that's going to be meaningful for them and still add value. And particularly like someone like me coming from a deep tech background, I've never been a CFO. I have a hard time talking to CFOs. And so how do we bridge that gap and make it really meaningful? And what does success look like within that corporate governance structure? And so figuring out how to drive good conversations with the board is a continuing challenge for every security leader that I know. And so historically, whenever we get together, we're always gossiping about how's that conversation going? Like, have you come up with any new tricks in order to make that a more fruitful discussion? And Laura Robinson at ESAF heard about how this was a constant topic of interest within the security leaders community. And so the idea that we could take our actual real world board reports, redact them, scrub out all the sensitive stuff, but keep the format and the structure, and then share that within the community. And what Laura and the team did is go through and look at all of these different reports and then start to do research against it and draw out what are the themes, the compare and contrast from one to the other. And it's been a really interesting exercise, because what we find is that there are some things that are universal, that everyone's trying to provide increased transparency. They're trying to give an update to the board that'll convey where we are, what is going well, where we need help. But the way in which we do it is so different across the industry. And so I'm more of a narrative guy. And so when I sit down and compose my materials for the board, it's more like a letter. And so it's a couple pages, it's prose, you could read it in paragraphs. Some other folks, when they put together materials for the board, it might be in a PowerPoint format, but it's lots and lots of numbers. And the data is there, the metrics are there, and they're surfacing it all directly for the board to consume. Whereas my style is to digest all of that information that exists, but then try to convey in prose narrative style, what does it mean? And so some people want to see the data. Some boards just want to know, what does it tell you? You're the expert. You explain it to me. And so being able to compare each of those different formats and understand what are some of the things that are universal across each of these is really useful for me, because then I can go and use that to double check. Am I leaving something out? Is there a clever idea that I can borrow and put into work in my environment to make that conversation more fruitful?
Agreed. Excellent. Brad, I spoke to Laura earlier. 10 years ago, I think I did a panel at RSAC about metrics for the board, right, from a security point of view. And, it was interesting. A few people on the panel said, well, you have to dumb them down. And I don't know if dumbing down was the right word or the right phrase or even the right idea. It was more, I felt, you had to translate. You had to translate security talk to business talk, because business talk is the language of the board. And you're right, it is. It's a different language, and some folks are comfortable with it, some aren't, right? But it's important for someone in your position to be able to talk both those languages, right? And because you need them. We were talking off camera. Look, over the last couple of weeks, months, we've had, some interesting developments in the role of the CISO. I think we were all a little saddened to hear that Joe Sullivan was at Uber, but before he was at Uber, Joe had a distinguished career in cyber, was convicted of crimes for not telling the truth and withholding the truth around a breach at Uber. And look, I think with not telling the truth is always wrong. Can't go wrong telling the truth, ever. So I'm not making excuses for him. But, to his defense, he said he was following orders, right, from the legal team there and everything. I think you contrast that with the month before we had Mudge at Twitter, kind of, the whistleblower, had his Jerry Maguire moment about why Twitter was a wreck waiting to happen from a security point of view. And to me, these are two extremes of what's a CISO to do. But both of those guys could have used an ESAF to kind of, before it went public, before the stuff hit the fan, to kind of verbalize, hey, what am I to do here? What's the right thing? What should I do? Wondering what you think about that.
Yeah. So one thing that I think is a theme that came out in the report is talking about incidents. And so whenever you have a security event, so something goes wrong, and it might be a small issue, it might be a massive issue, and trying to figure out what is the right level of detail to get into to convey these incidents to the board. And this is one of the things that came out as universal, is just about every single board report, no matter who the author was, what the company was, there was some element within the outline that conveyed, this is where we're going to talk about incidents. And so for me personally, this is something that I've been working to figure out what's the right level of detail to get into. What is the threshold and cutoff for an incident that we would talk to the board about? And then there's other topics. We talk with the lawyers about cyber materiality. And so from a SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission reporting perspective, you have things that are material, like if your factory shut down and you're going to miss your revenue numbers, that's a material event, and you have ways that you have to report that. And so in the security world, if you had an incident, it might trigger certain materiality thresholds, and then you go and communicate that. And there's like filings that you can make in order to communicate that. And so the thresholds within the community over what exactly represents cyber materiality is very much unclear and evolving. And so whatever we think it is today, my threshold for talking about something to the board is vastly lower than that, because I don't want the board a year later to say like, hey, you knew about this all along. Why didn't you tell us? That's something I'm really worried about. And so I bring to them anything that's remotely interesting within that incident realm, because I want to make sure that I'm over reporting and disclosing at the board level. And so these are things we don't have to talk about publicly. There's no notification obligations that we have under any regulatory regime. And frequently they might be more of what we call a near miss than a real incident. So it's like something bad could have happened, but it didn't, but still like we got shook up a little bit. And so we want to talk about it. And what I really like about this approach is that the more sunshine you bring to these incidents, the more people that know about it, the more that you can learn from it and figure out what are you going to do different next time to make this less likely to occur. Or if something like this were to happen again, how do we limit the blast radius or the impact of what it could have? And so that's something that we've spent a lot of time thinking about within my team here at Cisco. And then it turns out that this is a hot topic for just about every security team out there. And so it came across in the report in terms of the information that people are sharing with the board is really focused on those incidents. And so when I just read the headlines, I'm not a lawyer, but when I read about what happened at Uber, one of the key problems there was such a small number of people who were in the know. And it seems like if you had a broader set of folks involved, that you could have driven that towards a better outcome. And so that's what we're hoping for, is you bring the right people in the room, and you can't have 100 people, you'd have to have a good conversation, but the right people in the room that have the right information. And then hopefully with that group, you can then drive the right analysis that will then lead to the best outcomes for the organization and for any other stakeholders that are involved.
Excellent. Fred, we're almost out of time, but Laura had mentioned, for folks who want to get their hands on the report, and by the way, you don't have to be a CISO to get value out of this report. I'd recommend it for anyone in the cyber realm or anyone who has to deal with cyber folks, as part of their jobs. You can get it off of the main RSA site, I believe, right? Just look up for ESAF. And it's available there. I should also, mention, or I should ask you, RSAC is coming up in April this year. Will ESAF, I'm going to assume you're still going to have your regular meetings there in person,
Yep.
But will there be a public presence as well?
I don't know. So I'm on the program committee. So, we're looking through a bunch of different options. Usually what we do is it's like the cool kids club. So people that are in acting roles today. So we don't have a lot of emeritus folks floating around. So you've got to be in the job right now. And the group, the joke is it's like group therapy for CISOs. And so we all get together. It's a safe space. We can hang out together. This year coming up in April, it's going to be on Tuesday. And so we all get together. And some of the ideas that we're figuring out is with public reports like this, what are the other opportunities that we have in order to help get more information out to more folks that can benefit? And then the idea that at this coming RSA, there might be some ideas that we could do things with a broader audience. So these are the things we're working through with the program committee, but nothing's scheduled yet. So we're still working through the different options.
Got it. You know what? As long as you're doing it Tuesday, we're doing our DevSecOps event Monday, we've been told, for RSA in Moscone this year. So stop by, Brad. We'd love to have
I'll be free.
a real talk about it. Hey, man, thank you for all the work you're doing with the ESAF and the programming committee. Appreciate it. Looking forward to what else comes out of ESAF.
Great. Thank you. This is fun talking.
All righty. Brad Arkin from Cisco and the ESAF here on Techstrong TV. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
Hey everybody, happy Monday. Cody J. Brown here with some upcoming programs from Techstrong Learning. So first up, tomorrow morning, Tuesday, October 18th at 11 a.m. Eastern, AWS and Sumo Logic are back with another roundtable on next level DevOps, overcoming the silos. Our panel will take a DevSecOps approach on baking security into your software delivery lifecycle and how analytics and automation can secure you against threats. Following, Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern, Tricentis is hosting another roundtable packed with DevOps wizards in Open Sourcery, Vanquish Your Open Source Testing Silos. Our panel will explore the benefits of open source testing sources and how to build a tool stack that's right for you. And on Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard, GitGuardian will tackle the issue of secrets sprawl with secrets management and DevSecOps, an enterprise maturity model. If you are interested in benefits of automated secrets detection and want to develop your own secrets management program, you will not want to miss this one. So that is all I've got for you today, but we do have plenty of upcoming and on-demand programs for you here at Techstrong Learning, so stay tuned.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
This is Techstrong TV.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Open Source Summit. We're here in Dublin, and we're talking with Jonas van de Bogart from Alliander and Benoit Johnson from RTE. They are both specialists in the energy sector, and we're just going to get started with a simple question, which is, Jonas, why do we need a specific group of folks who are squarely thinking about open source and Linux in the energy sector? You guys are starting to work together. What are you trying to accomplish?
Thank you for having us here today. So in today's world, that's changing a lot. So the way we live, travel, and work won't be the same in the next 10 years. We see a huge change in the way how we use energy, generate energy, and distribute energy. And those changes are happening so quickly that it requires huge investments in digitalization, especially in the energy sector. And we honestly, personally, but also from an Alliander perspective, believe that we only can handle those changes by collaborating with other parties within the sector and outside the sector. And that has been one of the reasons for us to join LF Energy, to really bring together the group of organizations and people working on digital innovations in the energy domain. And open source can really be an enabler to bring these innovations to a rapid speed.
Benoit, where's that line between what you would call proprietary value that you guys might do versus what might be undifferentiated value that you would share with everybody, and how do you guys navigate that or figure out where that line may be, or is there no line because you're all in this together?
Yeah. So the line between the added value of sharing the code is actually, as Jonas was saying, so we have a huge wall of investment that we need to do for coding, for changing toward the more digitalization of the grid, and so Jonas is working in the distribution system operator. I'm working in transmission system operator. So both we're dealing with a grid, but we have different businesses. But we can share a lot of the electrons are exactly the same. So we are sharing the same equation. We're also operating a network. So we have a lot in common, even if our challenges are not always the same. So that's important for us to be able to share code to be more efficient. And regarding proprietary, to get back to your question, proprietary software, what is interesting with open source is that we are also master of what is inside. And so it's easier for us we are taking real critical decisions based on this software. And having white boxes are more important for us than just rely on something that we cannot understand because we don't have the key within it. And moreover, we're around the planet. A lot of people are doing the same thing, and that's a real opportunity for us to share the methodology, to share also the research, and to have everything in common, something that we cannot do with proprietary solutions.
So what does it mean to digitize the grid? And when you say that phrase, what exactly are you guys thinking about? Because you guys have been operating networks for a long time. It's not like you're brand new to computers. So we already have some level of digitalization. So where are we now, and what are you trying to get to?
Now, one of the challenges we have is that, especially in the Netherlands, we have one of the most reliable grids in the world. But you see that the demand for electricity is growing so fast at this moment that it's literally driving the grid to its limits. And that requires new smart solutions. An example to give is we need the capability to steer supply and demand in periods when the maximum grid capacity is reached. Think, for example, of a sunny summer day. There can be too much demand through solar energy. But on the other side, on a winter day where there's nearly no sun or no wind, there can be too much demand. So we need new digital solutions and capabilities to steer those demands in periods when the maximum grid is reached. And we believe in realizing those new digital capabilities, open source can play a vital role.
All right. Benoit, are we over our skis a little bit? Maybe that's a U.S. term, but it seems to me we're seeing some mandates from people where they're saying we're going to have electric cars by 2035 in the state of California. The grid in the state of California probably is never going to be able to support everybody plugging in their cars by 2036 or whatever year it may be. So, our aspirations kind of out of line with our capabilities at the moment, and we're kind of racing to catch up.
Yeah, sure. So electric vehicle is one of the trigger of the energy transition. So one of the mean of the energy transition, and that's something that we need to be able to manage, and that's something new for us. So we need to be able to host the where we plug the vehicle. We need also to be able to manage the load, and to have market mechanism, or also the technical mechanism to be able to charge the electrical vehicle at the right time. And that's also with the Centrains, with the renewables. So now you have wind power and solar that are not working at the right time in the day. So we need to be more smart. And that's at both levels, DSO, TSO, that can also be at the market level, and that can be locally. So everything needs to be changed. And digitalization, the way that we're exchanging the actual state of the system, is very important to make the right decision, and to have adequate use of these new levers that we have, for example, with the electric vehicle, because that's also an opportunity for us. That's a flexibility that we can use to meet the challenge that we are facing.
Right. Because collectively you need more observability at the end of the day, but then you need to be able to actually take action on whatever it is you're observing, right?
Exactly.
So that seems like there's a lot of software that goes into that issue too. So that's not just the white boxes. So what are you guys thinking about for that whole stack, a layer of software that would be developed to drive all of this, because it's monitoring at a level that's probably not been seen before?
No, this requires multiple new solutions and capabilities. And already we host 18 projects within the Linux Foundation Energy, and those go from the application domain through the edge domain. And to give you one example of one of the applications we both are collaborating on is OpenStaff. And that's a project that is focused on making forecasts on the load on the electricity grid for the next hours to days. And why is it essential? As already Benoit was mentioning, is both solar and wind are very unpredictable, but have a huge impact on the load on the grid. So we need to have this type of solution to give us insight in what the load on the grid will be for the next 24 to 84 hours, so that we can understand when the maximum grid is reached and also have time to take action when necessary.
All right. Benoit, there's been some activity on the other side of the continent, and involves security, and people are
You're talking about the war?
I am talking about the war. How are we going to address the security issues around critical infrastructure, of which the grid is probably at the core of it, and you guys are probably targets, and you're probably getting attacked every day by somebody trying to do something in your systems. So is there going to be a challenge around the cybersecurity aspects of all of this?
Of course, but that's not a new challenge for us. That's something that we took into account for years already, and that's so nobody is safe. But we took already a lot of measures, and all our systems are isolated, so it's very difficult for a hacker to get into our systems. That's not a challenge that I am.
You're not throwing down a challenge right now.
Yeah, but
right.
we think, and we could see also a few years ago that there was an attack in Ukraine, and that we show that our systems could be very weak, and that we could endanger the whole country with this kind of attack. So we are conscious of that, we are aware of that, and our policies are very strong regarding security.
All right. How smart can the management of these systems get? We hear a lot about machine learning and AI, and is this stuff you guys are looking at? Because you need to make some decisions in microseconds, so it's not, people won't be able to keep up with that, right?
Yeah. The system is getting complexer every day. And it's impossible for a human to handle all this kind of information and take the decisions in a timely manner. So we're gonna moving to a world where we're going to be relying more and more on measurements, IA models, machine learning models, to provide insights, but also to take decisions in regards to where to steer a load or other mechanisms in the grid.
All right. We're all getting beat up about energy a little bit in terms of its consumption and its impact on the climate. How does this all connect back to any effort to be carbon neutral, decarbonization? Are you guys talking about that? How do you kind of assure people that the electricity they're consuming from you has been produced in the most climate-friendly way?
How can we ensure? I don't think we're able today to ensure that it's possible, but that definitely our challenge every day to make that happen, make that possible, to have infrastructure and the way that we are operating the network, the smarter, and being able. So that's what the previous question you asked regarding the electrical vehicles. If we are able to manage the load of the charging of the vehicle, we can charge the vehicle once the electricity is green, and maybe sometimes use the electricity from the battery when we need it, rather than to run gas or coal units. So we can do better. We can have a better energy mix, but we cannot ensure that we will be able to have the balance in a few years based only on green energies.
We can aspire. There are multiple grids in both the U.S. and here and other countries. Do these need to be integrated better, and do we need more interoperability across them? It seems like there are grids here, there are grids in Spain and Portugal that are slightly different. I mean, so do we need to unify the grids, or are we better with things being slightly separate?
I think there is a need to bring it more closely, to make it more interoperable. On the other side, especially we already see that in the Netherlands, the electricity grids, but also the gas grids, has been there for many years. It's really old technology, which is really stable and reliable. But can be different in the west part of the Netherlands or in the east part of the Netherlands, and can also be different between countries. So I think it's not the goal to have one the same grid everywhere. But I think we do need to see where it makes sense to interconnect them, to make better use of the capabilities available in the different countries.
Mm-hmm. Are you taking a harder look at the sustainability requirements of the infrastructure that you're acquiring to go modernize these grids, and the suppliers that come to you? Are you asking them to, prove to you that their equipment is more energy efficient? And it seems like sustainability is a bigger requirement from all those guys than it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, where we were like, how fast is it, and we didn't really care how much electricity it consumed.
For that, I would. That's not the up to us as the grid operator to decide for that. That's at the level of the state to make the right decision, and we are to host what we have to host and connect what we have to connect, and do our best with the assets that we have in terms of production and generation and consumption. But that's not to us to define the policy that we want the consumer to have regarding the ecological things.
So that's up to somebody in Brussels or somewhere.
Or in Paris for France, connected of course with someone in Brussels, but that's not. We are operating the grid.
And to add from that, from a Linux Foundation energy perspective, really stimulate the move to a more clean and renewable energy. And I think from a mission perspective, we really try to emphasize the importance of that, and try to focus and give room for projects which stimulate that. Both from projects that focus on a distribution system operator and a transmission system operator like us. But LF Energy is also focused on broader projects in other parts of the energy domain, which can be focused on more the consumer side or the market side or other topics.
So what are you asking folks to do for LF Energy? Do you want them to contribute their time? Do you want them to write code? Do you only want a certain number of companies that are in the energy sector to join? What's kind of the ask that you're looking for?
The ask for us, of the call to action for us, the most important is we have a huge challenge. Not only us in regards to the energy transition, but I think we have a huge challenge as a world to move to a more energy system that's more renewable, more clean, and more accessible for everyone in the world. And we would like to invite everyone who is working in that space to seek out to LF Energy, but also to one another, to see where we can bundle powers, to work together and tackle this huge challenge we have. And I think, and I really believe, that open source can be an enabler to combine the investments, but also the smart people and the capacity that we have in building great solutions that can really change for the better of the world, especially in relationship to the energy sector.
Benoit, you want to close out and add anything? What's on the top of your wish list?
Yeah, so we are looking to have 10,000 developers around this energy sector, and we think really that open source is the way to go further, faster, and regarding the challenge of the climate change, that's something that we need to implement. And so we like to have more people from the utilities themselves and also from the vendor side to come and onboard the Linux Foundation Energy. There is also business in that, so it's not that we don't want to pay for the solution. It's that we need to have this software ecosystem as soon as possible, and the only way to do it in an efficient manner is open source. So that would be my main message.
All right, great. Hey guys, you heard it here. If you want to help save the planet, go call these guys because it's a start in the right direction. Gentlemen, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having us.
All right, and we'll be back in a minute.
This is Techstrong TV.
Welcome back, folks. We're at the Open Source Summit in Dublin, and we saved the best for last. We have Sal Kimmage, who's head of developer relations for Sonatype, and we're going to be talking about open source, gender equality, and how it's really just all a math problem. So, Sal, walk us through how all this comes together in your mind, but there is a way to solve this issue.
I think so, absolutely. So I've been in open source for about 10 years, but before that, I think I had a really different background than a lot of people do. I started out my career working on actually Boeing aircraft. And when I was looking at that problem, we were trying to look at the interface of the cockpit, what information was available, and how it was altering the ways that they were making their decisions in real time. When I moved away from that, I started working on some really interesting neuroscience problems. I really became fascinated about how quantitatively can we define what is the difference between a high and a low performer in decision making for different areas and contexts. Coming out of that space, when I looked at open source, I found it to be really interesting because this is a space where we've got to do really highly distributed decision making around intellectual property. And we do all of that online over digital interfaces. And I think that it's these digital interfaces that are really having a major impact on who is allowed to participate. When I first became interested in this problem, this is pretty new to me. It was just the last open source summit. I went to the diversity track and I was hearing a lot of the same old discussion about how we need better hiring practices, we need more mentorship, and all of that's absolutely true. But there was a study done in 2017 that looked at real GitHub pull requests from male and female identified handles. And when you take those genuinely real pull requests, real code, and you split them up and you say, let's review these without any identifying information, no images, no handles, no email. When you have none of that and you just look at the quality of the code review, you saw something fascinating. So the statistics look like this. Without identifying information, female identifying GitHub handles actually had an acceptance rate that was 4% higher than the average male PR acceptance, meaning that without any identifying information, they were providing higher quality contributions that were statistically more mergeable. With those exact same pull requests in this study, if you did provide identifying information about the gender of the individual, those exact same pull requests from the exact same people with the exact same code, the female PRs were then rejected at a rate which was 9% lower. So we're talking a 15% gap in the acceptance rate of female contributions when we're looking at literally the exact same code. So those statistics alone prove to me 2 points. There is absolutely a bias that is going into the decision making around what code is accepted that is not germane to the code itself. And it also proved to me that if you remove that metadata, we solve the problem. And for me, I think that's a really interesting approach because yes, we need much better diversity in this space, but when we're looking at unconscious bias from human beings. It's not something that you can teach out of anyone. You can teach best practices, you can talk about diversity all day, but we could also just simplify the approach and see if we can engineer a solution that makes it easier for maintainers to make the right decision. And I think that's a really, really good direction to take this.
So, I mean, first of all, I'm not surprised because coming from the male side of the world, you're basically telling me that 15 to 20% of the people on my side of the equation are idiots. So I get that. I'm okay with that. The next thing, though, is so do we just strip out the identifiers in our workflows so that we don't have this issue? And is it really that simple?
I think it really is that simple. So one thing that I want to be really clear about is that I would not argue for anonymizing any other part of open source. I'm specifically asking that we mask the metadata at the initial point when a pull request is received. After you push a button as to whether or not you want to accept or deny that pull request, all of the metadata should become available immediately. I do not think that open source can or should be this strange anonymous space. That's not how open source works or how it should work. But we need to make it much easier for people to make decisions based on the quality of code and not based on any other assumptions that don't have any relevance to whether or not it's going to improve the code base.
Outside of the example at hand, Codebase, do you think that this same kind of dynamic works in other industries and other places?
Yes, thank you for asking, because it absolutely does. One of the reasons why I'm so confident that this would work is because I actually did solve this problem in a different field a couple of years ago. I was working in computational neuroscience, and I do miss my supercomputers. But for a couple of months, I did not have access to a supercomputer, and I wanted to look into cloud computing. There was no resources for that at the time, so I designed a large online course that had about 1,000 people that took it the first year, and we had experts from all around the world come in, provide educational resources to teach people all the way from the beginning of like, what is a Jupyter notebook to how do you do generative intelligence on SageMaker. It was a really, really cool course called the Online Brain Intensive. But with my signal processing background, I decided that on all of our communicational platforms, Slack, etc., even the experts themselves would not identify themselves. So it made sure that the conversations that were had were much more interesting because nobody knew when they were talking to the expert, so they were much more respectful. But much more interesting than that, this is a field with 17% female representation in computational neuroscience. But my course had 56 female representation. So the majority were female identified. But much, much more interesting than that, which I did not expect, was that when I went and asked the experts each week who had the most interesting unanswered hypothesis, I was able to trace those handles back to women. More than 80% of those responses, the experts said more than 8 out of 10 times that it was a woman who had the most interesting unanswered hypothesis. That really floored me. I initially thought that I had just inverted my stats, right? Because 20% female representation, 80% females with the best ideas. How could that be? I thought that I had created a training platform that was primarily targeted towards PhD students. If you completed it, you got AWS credits to go compute and create a peer-reviewed computational paper. That resource, it turns out, 35% of the women taking my course were 10 to 15 years ahead of me in my career. They were postdocs in their first or second postdoc on average. Now, why were women that are pretty much solidly in the middle of their career using my resource? They cited it was because they needed access to computation that they were not receiving, that their male colleagues were receiving. So this is a space where we're seeing implicit bias, really interestingly, make sure that we're knocking out some of our most qualified, most interesting possible contributions. And when we remove any of those factors, we make it possible for someone to go and speak to an expert just based on the quality of the information, on the quality of their ideas. It allows those to surface.
I don't know. I would be tempted to almost reverse the biases a little bit, and I'd want to favor the pull requests from women because, be frank about it, my wife is a lot more precise than I'll ever be, and it's a precision game at the end of the day. So maybe it's also just a mindset too that, if you're the manager of this thing and you're responsible for it, maybe you want to think through, well, who is putting together the most precise code, and have a look. So does this become a new KPI that we need to think through and really start tracking, and it becomes a little more interesting because, the people running this at the top of the food chain, they just want the best thing at the end of the day.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I would not argue for biasing towards any specific population. I want to build a platform that biases the best idea, and I don't care what the body is that idea comes in. If we really want to get serious about globalizing open source and making sure that this is sustainable, we have to be serious about engineering equity. So we should not be focusing on any specific demographic, and I think that's really where I take issue with some of the current approaches to diversity. They're really falling short of making sure that we systematically engineer a way that is sustainable in getting those best ideas. I do want to say the reason why that GitHub study most likely had better contributions, more mergeable contributions from female PRs, is because women tend to get involved in open source at a much later stage in their career. They tend to be doing this from production experience. So that's most likely why they're providing, on average, better commits in that space.
Mm-hmm. How much of this does trace back to the way we approach math in grammar school? It seems like girls seem to bail out in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade a little bit. And it seems to be that the way that the math class is structured and the people who teach it come from a system. And so how much of this is really just something we've ingrained, not just in software development, but we've ingrained it all the way down into basic math STEM, and it just plays out across all these industries in a highly predictable way when you think about it.
Exactly. Yeah, so the pipeline problem is a really serious one. And I do think it's that there is an issue with, and we have to consider, a lot of people think about these implicit biases as going one direction, right? As a negative bias from one person inflicted upon another and limiting the opportunities of a class of individuals who are already underrepresented. That's absolutely true. But that bias goes both ways. Women sometimes can be biased against participating in spaces that they fear they will not be welcome in. That's what is often cited is a lack of awareness of open source opportunities or a lack of mentorship to initially get started in open source, or a fear of engagement from some of the stories and experiences that they've heard, which are absolutely real. We're still looking at a space where the last time I checked, the representation for women in open source is 6%. So when we're looking at an open source, it's significantly worse than what we're seeing on average in other STEM spaces. So there has to be something particular to the design of the way that we communicate in open source that is making this particularly bad.
And when half the planet is made up of women, it's kind of like, it's a little silly.
So we're missing 54% of the best ideas in humanity. Why are we doing that? If we all claim to want the best thing, let's get that.
Does this issue also play out for nationalities and for race? Because if you know that, and it's easy to determine at least nationality or some sort of guess at that, and does that play out as a bias as well? Yes. I don't know if anybody's done the math on that, but it seems like, I know that there are people from certain countries that just don't like or trust people from other countries, and so maybe the whole thing is playing out in other ways.
Exactly. So unfortunately right now, the only real verified study that we have is this one only looking at gender diversity and only looking at pull requests. What I'm really arguing for, and my call to action here, is to get some major projects to participate in this metadata masking as a best practice. And if we do that, what I would like to be able to test is if pre and post we see an improvement in a couple of things. Yes, gender diversity, geographical diversity, racial and ethnic diversity, and I think you would also see an uptake in first-time contributors that are likely to stay around and be retained because they see that they're in a space where they are being valued for their ideas and not their identity.
And you also think there would be less resistance to some of the programs we're putting in place because we could mathematically support the improvements and the outcome and the output. Because right now, a lot of what we're doing is theoretical and speculative, and so people can be naysayers if they want, because they're basically proving a negative, right?
Yeah.
So is that going to be part of the thing where we could actually have some math that says, and here's how our efforts have benefited the thing, and it's a provable dynamic?
Yeah, it has to be. We cannot continue doing diversity improvement with qualitative metrics. We need quantitative metrics. And if, in my argument here, we find that it does not improve some of these demographics, if we find that it does not improve the rate of contributor sort of community increase, then I think that's great. That means that that was a false hypothesis. I suspect from the study that we should at least be able to predict we're going to see an improvement in gender, but there is no reason why we should not see an improvement for all other factors.
So how do people join into your, what it amounts to is a grand experiment? So how do we get everybody kind of plugged in and working down this path?
So when I really started looking into this, my background is not really in diversity. I just like building things that are good for signal processing. So I initially put out this talk to OSS just as a 10-minute talk, and then they asked me to do it for 40 minutes, and I was like, I will need more data. So I reached out to the New Stack, and they're doing a series of articles, reaching out and doing interviews with people who have already engaged in this space. So there are several extensions already available, one that was produced from Mozilla and one that is produced for Chrome. They're not actively maintained at this time, but they can and should be. Those are readily available for you to use as a maintainer on a project to put this into place today. Secondarily, I think we really need to stand up and ask these platforms. I focus on GitHub only because 85% of open source runs on GitHub right now, but all of these platforms should really be thinking about the cognitive design of the way that they're providing this information. In my dream of dreams, we have a button that allows an open source maintainer to choose to work in this way as a best practice. And that's really what I'm trying to fight for. It is possible that we may have to take some drastic approaches. If you remember about 10 years ago, the only reason why we got GitHub to change the user interface to allow us to upvote specific issues was through a change.org petition. We might have to do that, but I think that this is so urgent and so necessary and allows us to get data on what does and does not work to get those best decision makers into open source. I want to see it.
There are a lot of people who have private repositories. Can they contribute their metadata to something and you guys can and do an analysis together so they can at least see what's going on in their own organization? Is that worth doing? Or
Absolutely. So that is essentially why Mozilla started theirs first. So they wanted to do an internal test to see if they could improve the quality of code contribution just inside of their organization, and that's why that one exists. They did not do a lot of formal quantitative analysis, but qualitatively, it was reported that this improved the ability to communicate about issues and pull requests, which I find really interesting and I didn't really expect. I wouldn't believe that just hiding that data in that single condition would improve the quality of the conversation that happens afterwards. But I think it does really make sense if you consider that when you're just looking at the code and you really initially are making that decision, when I first write up whether or not I'm going to accept it, my reasoning for it, I'm not thinking about communicating to that individual. I'm thinking about communicating at the quality of the problem, which allows that information to be better distributed to potentially other problem solvers and other engineers. I think that's a really good way to think about improving our communication.
All right, I think we've proven the point. It is a math problem. Sal, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
All right. Folks, this is our last episode. This has been a blast to be here. We hope you would all come sometime in the future. Put it on your travel plans, because as great it is to talk to you, it's also awesome to talk to you all in person. But this will have to do for now, and we will see you all at the next big event.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Previously on Engineering the Change.
It's kind of like being on a football team. You got to make cuts to the roster, right? But we got to take it down to 3 finalists. Her essay was one of the best essays I've ever read in the 3 or 4 times we've done this.
Yeah.
So,
She's in.
Yeah. But there was, to me, Carly epitomizes why we do this. I give extra bonus points to people who can write well and can express themselves, and Donald did express himself. All right, so let's go through this then. Stephanie Sanchez, Donald Brazil, and Carly Duvel are our 3 finalists for this cohort's Engineering the Change Scholarship.
Engineering the Change has literally changed the lives of scholarship winners. Here are our past recipients.
My name is Victoria Roas. I am an immigrant from Brazil. I came to this country when I was 10 years old.
My name is Drew Johnson. I'm a full-stack software engineer.
My name is Alina Maluk. I'm from Ukraine. I'm the winner of scholarship from 2 cohorts before me.
The Engineering of Change scholarship that I won last year was life-changing.
I really poured my soul and told my story to them, and a few weeks later I got a call from Alan, and it was, I even cried on the phone, I think. And it was like a life-changing moment.
The program at Bocacot was amazing. It was easy for me with zero experience to learn the fundamentals of software development.
My career has completely changed from barely being able to, hold down a job to now being sought after by some of the biggest tech companies in the world.
Bocacot has built me up.
I got a job at hot fintech software company at the day of graduation.
I think that becoming a software engineer has been one of the most rewarding things in my life.
I am Carly Duberval, mother of 2 amazing children. I have a bachelor degree in accounting.
My name is Donald Brazil. I was born in Haiti. I was raised in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Growing up, I've always been interested in technology.
Hi, my name is Stephanie. I'm originally from Haiti. I've resided in Miami for forever, it feels. I currently have a degree in psychology, and I enjoy helping people.
I migrated recently to Florida because of insecurity and political issue.
I fell into software engineering as something I would love to pursue.
I feel like there is a void that that I still have. There's something tugging at me because I feel like I have not challenged myself to reach my full potential.
Here in the US, my degree is not accepted. I need to work for my family duties.
Winning this scholarship is a great opportunity for me to finally, pursue that career in software engineering. And, I would love to, give back to those who were in my position where they were completely lost and didn't really have any guidance.
My goal is to be a vessel to other people, other underrepresented communities.
Without money and resources, I can't afford to go to Boca College.
And being a finalist is an amazing opportunity. I would never have thought I would have been even considered.
This field, I will be good at it. And I have an opportunity to make an impact on my community and the world.
If I won this scholarship, I will share my knowledge with other Black women, immigrants, who share my faith.
I would love to, have the opportunity at the end of the day to showcase those who believe in me, and then, help others who also, would be in the same position that I am.
Because I know my contribution will make a lifelong impact on the world.
Thanks so much for joining us here for this interview today. And you know what? Making it to the finals for this is an accomplishment in and of itself. And I think it really talks about the kind of person you are. And, reading your essay, I was very, very impressed. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
In 5 years, I will be that software engineer who will help immigrants to achieve their dreams.
5 years, I would love to see myself, slowly opening my organization, have it on the ground, running. I just want to see myself helping others, just like others help me. I just want to give back to those who gave to me.
I see myself hopefully excelling in the field of software engineering, and I don't know exactly what my niche will be. So I know that I'm going to be excelling. I don't know exactly what it'll look like right now, but you guys will be proud.
Why do you want to be a software engineer? What's gonna make you stick through this at the end of the day?
I love it. I can do it. I will do it. Why I will do it? Because I love it.
It's just a great field to get into. The technology portion of it is just something I've always been interested in. As a kid, I've always been interested in computers, phones, gadgets.
I always felt a need to, or a pull toward doing something for someone else. In the field of engineering, allows me to continue to do that, because whether it is in a medical field, the automotive field, just the world of entrepreneurship, there's just so many different ways that I can continue doing good and making an impact.
One of the things that's something that's very near and dear to my heart is, equity, parity, gender diversity, and just diversity and parity on all levels, equality. And I wonder how do you envision going about doing that?
Like I did with my old career, I lift women to accounting in my country. I motivate them, I assist them, and help them to achieve, like I said, to achieve their dream, to be excellent in this field.
I would love to open an organization that can, give back to those and help guide them with the opportunities that I'd had from this experience.
What drives you to do software engineering and not go back to something that you've already known and you've obviously been very successful at?
I would say now everything is technology. So why should I say in accounting? If the world is moving and everything now is tech. I have two brothers. One died in 2007. He was a senior software engineer. My youngest brother is a software engineer. Why not me? It's because I'm woman? No. I want it, I will do it.
At the moment right now, I work inventory for a home installation company. It's a pretty okay job, but it's not what I feel that I was meant to do.
The knowledge I have, I can pass on to other people. I know some of the challenges that our communities face, So with my knowledge and my mentorship, whether it's mentoring one person or just a group of people, exposing them to this field and to just other fields that exist where there's more to life than just what is in front of us. And I believe that I can be a bridge in that gap.
How do you feel like the scholarship is gonna do to you? Like, why is it important for you to win this?
I will share my knowledge with people, with women or immigrants, and use my knowledge to help them.
This scholarship is giving me that opportunity to show the world that, you know, I can do great things.
So this scholarship would definitely assist me in changing the trajectory of my life and hopefully where I can continue this same legacy in helping other people as well.
You know, your essay was amazing. Your answers here today were amazing. You really do represent what engineering the change is all about. Thanks for coming in today, and we can't wait to announce our winners soon.
Looking for a live conference focused on the tools, technologies, and practices most important to your business? Innotech conferences are live one-day business and technology conferences highlighting the latest in trends for IT leaders, developers, and IT professionals. Each event combines education, innovation, peer-to-peer networking, and the latest technology and business solutions for a diverse IT-focused audience. Innotech conferences occur throughout the year in strategic regional locations, bringing together technology professionals from various industries to learn about the solutions, practices, and tools impacting their day-to-day work and gain insight into what's to come. Presenters at Innotech conferences are selected and curated to ensure each session provides the most up-to-date and relevant information without any hype. Whether you're interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, cloud, IT leadership, or DevOps, Innotech conferences deliver. 2022 events are scheduled to be held in Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, and Washington, D.C. Innotech conferences are produced by Techstrong Live and powered by Techstrong Group.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Gregory Kurtzer, who is the CIO for CIQ. They just filled out their whole management team, and they're building a distribution of Rocky Linux. And so the question immediately comes to mind with so many Linux distributions out there, why do we need another one? Gregory, ball's all yours.
Thank you, Michael. Great question. So as you alluded to, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of Linux distributions that have existed over the years, many of them really filling kind of particular niches within the community. Where we really focused on was to fill the gaping hole after CentOS was end of life. CentOS was one of the prominent, if not one of the most largely utilized Linux distributions in the enterprise and cloud computing spaces. And that project was end of life, and it got moved to, instead of being behind Red Hat Enterprise Linux, it was moved to in front of Red Hat Enterprise Linux as a testing ground and as a solution for people who want to see kind of what might be coming in Red Hat Enterprise Linux and in the Enterprise Linux ecosystem as a whole. So that left a gaping hole, as I said, in the enterprise Linux community for a freely available enterprise Linux solution, which CentOS has historically taken. Once that was end of life, we came along and we created Rocky Linux, which was designed to be a complete drop-in replacement for everybody who was using CentOS Linux as of the time when it was end of life.
So what drives people towards Rocky Linux versus going with something like RHEL? Is it just a matter of support and licensing fees, or is it a matter of the licensing terms? What exactly is at the root of the conversation there?
Another great question. So, Red Hat Enterprise Linux is a tremendous product. It is a lot of utilization, and enterprise community is definitely using it, and they're going to continue using it. But that's not necessarily the best solution for everybody because it's not free. It is quite expensive, actually. Because Red Hat Enterprise Linux is derived on so much existing open source software, it makes sense for there to always be a freely available form of enterprise Linux. With the migration of CentOS kind of going from behind Red Hat Enterprise Linux to now in front of it, it actually also further engages the community to create enterprise Linux as a standard, more as a community standard, as opposed to a Red Hat standard. So what we've seen happen is kind of a shuffle of everything. CentOS used to be behind. It is now in front. It is a community portal. It is a community collaboration point for what is going into enterprise Linux. And that means that Rocky Linux is now a child of CentOS Stream, as is Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So Red Hat Enterprise Linux and Rocky are now more of peers, as opposed to one being an upstream and one being a downstream, where both of us kind of have the same parent of CentOS Stream. Now, to your question, why would somebody choose something like Rocky Linux versus Red Hat Enterprise Linux or any one of the number of other operating systems that are out there? And I would really kind of fall back on the uptake and motivation for why were people using CentOS. People need a freely available community solution for enterprise Linux. That coupled with the fact that we're actually trying to build, and not trying, we are building a community around enterprise Linux add-ons and value adds, and everything from special interest groups to starting to optimize Rocky Linux, everything from newer kernel you're going to see coming out here shortly that is coming from the upstream stable kernel coming from kernel.org. And we're going to start seeing value add opt-ins into Rocky Linux. Now, again, I want to be very clear. Rocky Linux is still going to be a bug for bug level of compatibility with the enterprise Linux community, but now you can actually have some additional features on top of that. So we see that as that's that stable foundation that everybody can go, everybody can grab, and you know exactly what you're going to get and what you're going to expect from that stable foundation. And now there's going to be additional add-ons that you can have that the Rocky community is producing.
This all happened over the course of the last year or so, or maybe year and a half. So what's been the adoption rate of Rocky Linux like? What's been the reception?
The adoption rate has been massive. At the low point, we're seeing about, and a lot of this is a guess because we have over 100 mirrors of Rocky Linux, but we're guessing at the low point, it's about 250,000 new downloads per month. On the upper side of that, we're seeing it approaching 1 million downloads per month. So we're seeing a massive amount of update. We're seeing various comparisons that are out there, like the EPEL status. If you're not familiar with EPEL, it is the extra packages for enterprise Linux repository hosted by Fedora. And they do publish I wouldn't call it raw data, but they do publish a lot of their download data about all of the different enterprise Linux variants that are connecting to that. And what we're seeing is Rocky has an amazing trajectory right now where it is basically just running neck and neck with Red Hat Enterprise Linux and with CentOS Stream. And those are the top 3 on that list. But if you look at ephemeral systems are systems that have short lives. A lot of people will be using ephemeral systems for things like CI/CD, for DevOps, for various development, container development, et cetera. Rocky Linux is now just towering over. It is just on a massive acceleration curve, beating by far everybody else in within the Apple community. So we're very happy with Rocky Linux's adoption and what Rocky Linux brings into that enterprise Linux community, and frankly, what it brings to all of the enterprise organizations and individuals that do need that stable Linux foundation.
Do you think in general we've kind of stopped paying enough attention to operating systems? We kind of started looking at other things, whether it's containers or all these other platforms, and yet the operating system continues to evolve. So, what are you looking forward to as we go along here with operating systems? What's kind of, top of mind from where you sit?
You touch on another really tremendous point, and we've talked in the past about containers and the container ecosystem a little bit. You're definitely right. The role of operating systems have changed, and it's kind of taken on now two kind of predominant roles. One is helping run the base operating system, right, or providing a platform for applications to run directly on top of hardware, whether virtual hardware or physical hardware, but it is that interface to your hardware. But the other role of operating systems now is the user space component of the operating system, the container, in a matter of speaking, right? That container, which is the libraries, the binaries, the infrastructure that a container app or contained application may require in order to provide the necessity of the requirements and dependencies for that application. So if that application requires something like OpenSSL or requires a C library or something along those lines, that core operating system does provide that. And so there's been now kind of this separation of what it is that the Linux distribution provides. Not only is it the kind of legacy historical background of, it's what you install directly to your hardware, whether again, physical or virtual, but now it's also what are you using as your base within your container. And we are definitely promoting the use and supporting both of the use or the use of both of those models.
Mm. As we go along, we're also hearing more about there's going to be support for Rust programming languages in Linux in the future and more of a shift towards these memory safe environments. Is that going to drive an upgrade of operating systems, do you think? Because people are looking at changing a lot of the fundamentals and how applications are built, and you kind of need to change the stack to go with it.
I think it's going to be very interesting to see what unfolds over the next half a decade to decade with regards to the kernel and how people are going to be leveraging some of the new features in the kernel in terms of lower barrier of entry of programming languages and interfaces to the kernel. So I'm very excited to see where that lands. In terms of predictions, I think we're going to see more people being able to contribute and be part of the Linux community, which I think is fantastic.
We also hear a lot about eBPF, which is in that microkernel thing that you were talking about. And it seems like to me, if I'm not misreading this, is a lot of the networking tools and a lot of the storage tools and even the security stuff is now going to kind of sit in their own little isolated microkernel. And so are we going to see this massive upgrade cycle in all those tools as we kind of shift to the next generation of operating systems?
I think so, but I like to see more and more coming down into user space as well, or to provide user space hooks into the kernel. I think we're going to see, especially with the advent of container computing and orchestration of container computing, I think we're going to see a lot more in that vein.
All right. So now you got your old gang of people working for you. You've got the whole squad built out. Where are you going to be a year from now? What's the prediction?
So the first thing that I want to mention is Rocky Linux is its own community. It's its own organization. And we've put that specifically outside of CIQ. And CIQ is my company that I'm CEO and founder of. But we put Rocky and we put all of our open source capabilities that we contribute to and or created and maintain outside of the corporate umbrella of CIQ. And we did this because we've seen a lot of companies at this point that have pivoted open source projects based on internal corporate agendas and internal requirements for revenue. And open source is not a switch that you turn on and off, based on marketing or sales requirements. It is a open and collaborative development model, which yields amazing results when done properly with projects that people really need and require. So we've taken special effort to ensure that CIQ is not in a position where we are owning or controlling or holding hostage open source projects. So we are purposely putting them outside of CIQ and encouraging other organizations to contribute and take part in these open source projects. So first thing I want to mention is Rocky Linux, as one of the open source projects that we contribute to and we help and sponsor, is outside of CIQ. CIQ now is forced to create a business model which is ethical and adds value to customers because we don't control it and we don't hold it hostage. So that puts the onus on us to actually create value. And that's where we've been focusing. So CIQ is the primary services and support partner for Rocky Linux, and we are the founding sponsor of Rocky Linux. But again, other organizations can come along and offer support and offer services behind Rocky Linux, and we encourage that. Google has announced, within the last 6 months-ish, that they have done that, and they're doing that very actively with Google Cloud. So the first thing I wanted to mention really is that Rocky is a standalone organization that's focused on the community and collaboration within the community. Now, CIQ is adding value on top of that, commercial value, enterprise value. So we do offer support. We do offer various services, professional services, education, and value add on top of Rocky Linux. These value adds are in terms of customizations. They're in terms of support, additional enhancements that you may need, as well as professional services, as I mentioned. So CIQ has now raised funding, and we've now built a very strong team to do this. And this team that we pulled along and was able to recruit, because there's a number of people out there within the world, both organizations as well as individuals, that love this vision that open source is so great that, if you love something, you should set it free. And so that's kind of been our mantra with regards to open source. And then a company has to come along and basically provide an ethical business model of value. And that's really what we've been doing. So we've been able to recruit an amazing, tremendous group of people to really help with that vision. And that's been that's our current big announcement that we're coming out with. So we're really happy to talk about that.
Yeah. And just to be clear, does the Rocky Linux have its own governing board or consortium, or is it going to be part of another consortium, or how do you kind of perceive the governing body around that?
Oh, another great question. So when we first kicked off, so there's a little bit of a story here. I'll keep it brief, but there's a little bit of a story here. So when we first kicked off Rocky Linux, it was of an urgent requirement that we basically had to go and solve a pain point for the community of everybody now needs this enterprise, freely available enterprise Linux distribution. So we immediately started building that, but we also immediately saw opportunity for how are we going to do this better, right? CentOS has been fantastic, right? It's been incredibly advantageous for, everybody in the enterprise community practically. So there's a lot of things that it's done tremendously well, but that doesn't mean that some things can't be improved upon. So we looked at what things happened early on in CentOS's foundation and development that could we have done a little bit differently, which would have created a different culture, a different community around CentOS. And so that's really, we paid special effort into that, but because we were all rushing to kind of get this deliverable out there into the community of, to solve this pain point, we also put some of the formalization of that on the back burner, just in terms of as we're managing priorities. Once we got Rocky 8 out there, and then Rocky 9 was right around the corner. So then we focused on our build system, got Rocky 9 out there. Now Rocky 8 as well as Rocky 9 are out there and being highly utilized. We really wanted to make sure that now, okay, we have this vision for what Rocky Enterprise Software Foundation should be. Let's now go back and formalize it. And we're right now in the last stages. You're going to see our next press release later this month is going to be specifically on how are we actually formalizing the Rocky Enterprise Linux structure, board of directors, management, leadership. How are we creating an inclusive community such that anybody in the world who wants to be part of what it is that we're doing with Rocky can actually not only be part of this, not only be a contributor, but eventually even have a pathway to become a leader of this organization. And so that's been very important to us. And we've been working very hard to build that. And as I said, we're in the final stages right now, and we are expecting another press release a little bit later this month, specifically on that. And I'd love to be able to talk with you again about that as soon as that's available.
All right. Well, we look forward to that. Hey, Gregory, thanks for being on the show and giving us an update on what's going on with Rocky Linux. And we'll be talking again soon, I suspect, shortly.
Absolutely. Thank you, Michael.
All right. Back to you guys in the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Frank Catucci, who is CTO and head of cybersecurity research for Invicti. And we're talking about a survey that they did that showed, and I know this is going to shock some of you, that developers are pushing code into production environments with known vulnerabilities. The issue, of course, is why and what's to be done about it. Hey, Frank, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me.
So for a lot of folks, this is kind of scratch your head time because we are seeing, congressmen are starting to put out legislation that says that thou shalt not push code with known vulnerabilities into production environments. And yet we all know it happens. But why? From your perspective, what would possess somebody to put a known vulnerability into a software component that's going into a production environment? Is it just that we think that we're better or that we just don't take it seriously, or what's going on?
There are probably a couple of different things here at play. I can't say that developers are pushing the vulnerabilities into code willingly and happily that contain vulnerabilities. But the truth of the matter is that a lot of the code that is written today is assembled, meaning that the majority of the code is pieced together with open source libraries, components, dependencies, et cetera, that come from various different types of sources across the internet. Now, a lot of that open source software, a lot of those libraries have these dependencies and or components that are embedded in them that contain these vulnerabilities. So that's one aspect of it. I would say that the other is that primarily the developer's job is to deliver functional code on time that works, meaning that they're incentivized to deliver and hit their sprint expectations on a regular basis. Now, they don't necessarily always have a let's say, an inclination or an incentive to deliver that code with zero vulnerabilities. It's extremely difficult for a number of reasons, but their main focus or their main goal is to deliver that code that functions on a timeline, if you will. And so that's part of the reason. The other piece is it's very difficult to fix or remediate a lot of these vulnerabilities and keep your product and or your software functioning for your end users. And those are a lot of profits and things that are tied to that, is not breaking current functionality. So the ability to fix all of those vulnerabilities and not break any current functionality within your software does take time and resources. Those time and resources are mostly directed to money output and revenue coming in for deliverables for your clients.
Yeah. We hear a lot about shifting responsibility left for security. We hear a lot about DevSecOps. What are the challenges in making that actually happen? Because it seems like most of the developers that I know, security was an elective when they were trained and they never took it. So, what makes us think that this is going to get any better anytime soon?
Yeah, so there are a couple of different, a couple of different things that I would say that are, hindrances or hurdles that need to be addressed. One is if we're going to shift security left, there's the assumption out there that we're already doing something on the right. So there's already that assumption that, okay, we're already having security scans and things done on the right. So now we need to like lift and shift this left. But really what it is it's a totally different paradigm, what you have for being able to enable these developers and enable DevOps processes to perform security. First of all, we can't slow down the production. So one thing that we need to do, and part of the hurdle there, is to make sure that the processes that are put in place are, I would say, very dev-friendly and dev-centric, meaning that they're going to flow at a speed and a cadence that won't hinder the development speed. And then what we're going to also have to do is try to work that security into the culture, meaning that we're going to have to put resources into awareness and training, put those resources into making sure that developers are informed and trained on how to use these particular tools and processes. And this can start all the way at the far left, meaning we could have plugins into the IDE, right? So we're talking from real-time or ad hoc development being done within the IDE that actually starts the checks, right? So we could do this from that point, and then we talk about working these processes into the flow of things like CI/CD. That's where we're really talking about having these flows and hooks where we commit code, the code is scanned before it passes to be merged, or something of that nature, that it passes a certain threshold. Now, what happens there is that we need to have, I would say, a very good ratio of signal to noise, meaning that if we have a lot of false positives or things that slow down that production, we will have those vulnerabilities or those findings get ignored. And so it's really a streamlined process that takes a little bit of time and discipline with more of a developer-centric view to come into fruition. And there needs to be that kind of buy-in from the top down that allows that ability of that security to be worked into the development processes. Anything from the secure design, the tech references, the documentation, all the way to before any line of code is getting written, all the way to where it's deployed in the various stages throughout the pipeline. So there are a lot of different unique challenges there. And again, assuming that you're already doing security on the right, we're shifting it left. But I think a lot of organizations are still struggling to get it in on the right. So that shift left comes at a little bit of a learning curve, if you will, especially with some of the tools and the different processes that could go with that.
And to your point about the right side of the equation, it almost seems to me, at least, that a lot of the security people focus their efforts on the things that they control. So they invest in security operations, and they think that the development team is taking care of application security. Meanwhile, the development team seems to think the security guys are taking care of that. So this whole thing kind of feels like watching, the ball constantly drop between a left fielder and a center fielder, and nobody's saying, I got it. Is that kind of core to the problem?
I would say that does happen, especially not in probably the most mature organizations, which is the vast majority, right? So if you look at it, security maturity, having a dedicated AppSec function is more of a luxury of a probably more technologically forward-looking company and or tech company or a born in the cloud type of company. There are a lot of manufacturing and retail and other type of organizations out there that don't necessarily have that forethought. So having that AppSec leadership or that AppSec function specifically defined within your org does leave the opportunity for that ball to get dropped, if you will, where security is like the developers are responsible and the developers are like, oh, security will take care of it later. And so as that maturity increases, we start to see more of a focus to understand where exactly the certain responsibilities should fall. And I think a lot of that responsibility is more of this like joint effort or collaboration between the groups. And as we know, that's the most difficult for a time and resource constrained group to be able to contribute to. So I think there's definitely some of that going on.
How automated do you think this will get long term? Because as we pointed out, developers themselves don't have a lot of security expertise. So can we embed more of the guardrails in the development process? And what does that look like? And, can the platform kind of save us from ourselves?
Yeah, I think we're going to see more of that reliance and adoption of the automation pieces if we are going to continue to be able to work at the same matter of efficiency and deliverables, meaning that I think we're going to look at this from a couple of different scopes. So from things like SCA, right? We have this software composition analysis that takes a look at a lot of the open source libraries, the components, the dependencies, et cetera. So a lot of what happens there is the automation with some of these tools and SCA are already kind of built in and hooked into your DevOps pipelines. So yes, we're going to see more of the automation on that piece as far as, okay, if there is a piece of code getting merged or a specific release that is going to be merged that contains a critical or high vulnerability, it's going to fail the build. So the build fails, and then that responsibility shifts over to the developer to fix that code. And that could be in the form of a Jira ticket or a ServiceNow ticket or however that's formulated for that organization. And that automation is going to be, in other words, so the developer fixes it and then they resubmit, right? So they resubmit that build. And then if the build passes, or those scans pass, it moves on to the next phase. And I think we're seeing that far more with things that either directly hook into the Git environments, meaning the GitLab or GitHub workflows, as well as software composition analysis. And then we see this, static code analysis piece, hooking that directly in. There's some time constraints with some of that. So we're looking at things that are quicker and more agile from a static code analysis. So we're doing a lot more things, with grep, and we're doing a lot more things where we are looking at perhaps iterances of that specific test rather than doing a complete test on the code base. And we're looking to cut down the time there. So there's some lighter scanning that's taking place there, some lighter linting, some code quality checks and things that we're doing that are automated. And we're still going to draw the threshold, right? So for this specific component or library, or again, this piece of code that we're pushing out, if it has to do with a sensitive piece of software, that perhaps has an additional risk factor to it, or that contains or processes personal information, financial information, that's where we'll ratchet up that security and then fail if it has a specific finding, and then submit for retest. Same on the DAST side. So on the DAST side, we're looking at a couple of different pieces as well, right? So we have DAST that is looking at the application after it's compiled and deployed to a non-production environment. This gives us a couple of different advantages. We're not only looking at the code or the raw source, but we're also looking at the configuration of the hosting and the server and the environment of which that code is being deployed. So we're testing the web server, we're testing the application, we're testing the configs of how that application is delivered. And then if those have a specific level or threshold of vulnerability, we can actually fail the push to production rather than failing previously at the build. So it's one of these things where kind of we're moving through the assembly line of security. And we're looking to say, okay, SCA, okay, SAST, now, this is compiled and deployed with a specific configuration. We need to make sure that DAST is taking a look at this, to look at the web configuration, to look at the host, et cetera, to make sure that there's a it's not just the code level, but it's also that application layer as it works with the underlying hosting layer. So it's kind of a really a left to right delivery method in which needs to be secured, and it's difficult to do, and that's how we end up with a lot of these vulnerabilities finding their way through is just one of those gaps or one of those lapses that allows a specific piece to go through and have these vulnerabilities later.
Do you think the bad guys are getting better or more efficient at finding those vulnerabilities and misconfigurations that are showing up in these production environments?
Yeah, they have plenty of practice, right? So, it's funny, at any given time, you will see things like, you can't scan us, you can't do this, we don't want to scan prod. These libraries can't be upgraded because they'll break functionality, it'll take us a week to fix. Okay, well, in the meantime, if I'm a bad guy, first of all, I don't care about your rules, right? So I don't care that I'm not allowed to scan your prod environment. Guess what? I'm doing it anyway. I don't care that you can't upgrade your piece of software, because right now I'm going out there and I'm looking at publicly available proofs of concept, or I'm developing my own proof of concept code for an exploit in more advanced circumstances. And we are also looking at the utilities and amount of availability, meaning that I can plug something in that's a new vulnerability into something like Shodan or something of that nature, where I'm saying, okay, well, find all of these Exchange servers where this is accessible. Now I have a very finite target group to focus on and try to do things to attack those systems. Now, people also put mitigating circumstances, right? So mitigating factors like web application firewalls, things of that nature. Always good idea to have those, but you can't solely rely on that, because there are things that attackers are getting more sophisticated about, and that would be like WAF bypasses, right? So being able to bypass a WAF with maybe a double encoded payload or something of that nature. And it's kind of a cat and mouse game. But at the underlying kind of truth here is that we still need to fix that code, right? We can mitigate it, we can buy us some time, but the code behind the scenes still needs to be fixed. And that's where a lot of that difficulty comes in, and actually putting those fixes in, and the amount of time and or testing it takes to do so.
Speaking of testing and scanning, what are the best practices for that? Because it seems like a lot of developers will tell themselves, well, I'll write some code today and then I'll scan it at the end of the week. And then by the end of the week comes, there's a massive amount of code and they don't want to scan it because it takes too long. So it feels like kind of sometimes we're our own worst enemy.
Yeah, I would say so. So I would say best practice there is to scan everything and scan often, right? So most likely the scenario is to be scanning continuously would be a best practice, and that would be everywhere. And the reason I say that is because we look at things like, I don't want to beat dead horses here, but we look at like Log4j, right? The day before Log4j came out, you were getting a clean scan. Right. So that scan was clean. And everybody works really fast to put these signatures and things out there, or to be able to dive into your code base and say, hey, we recognize that this is a component that we need to find, right? Where is it? Well, our scans, everything else, everything's labeled clean until the next day when all of a sudden the signature's written, or within the couple of hours when the signature's written. And now all of a sudden we have these kind of red flags and alerts everywhere, right? So if you wait a week, it might be far too late, right? So what was secure today might not be secure in 3 hours or 6 hours or 9, but that and speed. So the more often you scan, especially if you're, let's say, doing iterations of specific code bases, or scanning only what's new versus a total scan. And say we do a total scan, at the end of the day or the end of the week, but we're going to constantly scan what's being built and when it's being built at real time, cuts down on the time it takes. So one, you're getting better information, more accurate information as far as what might be vulnerable. Two, you're also cutting down the time that you're waiting, or the time that you would be, functioning as a gatekeeper per se, and letting this code be produced. So I would say that the more continuous and regular scanning that you can do on a regular basis, almost nonstop, it would be the recommended path. There's also a piece to that about discovery. We look at a best practice for discovery, meaning that we want to know everything that is out there. We want to know everything that's responding to a GET request on our network, or our ephemeral edge these days, right? So we want to know what is out there, what is being spun up. These services are constantly being spun up and spun down. These containers, these environments, Kubernetes, et cetera, we're constantly ramping up apps and attack surface. The load goes up, these hosts are fired up, this new code goes out, something of that nature. We're releasing multiple times a day. We're no longer have this static code base where we're releasing, once a month or once a quarter, right? So the code's changing, the environments are changing, the attack surface is changing, and really the only way to know that is to be looking almost in real time, or as close as you can get, to keep those scans and keep that discovery going in a real-time basis.
All right, folks, you heard it here. Scanning is a lot like other preventative health measures that you might take in your life, and you're much better off having to take them early and often as possible. Hey, Frank, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Mike. And I would be happy on any follow-up. If anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out.
All right, guys, back to you in the studio.
I hope you all enjoyed today's episode of Techstrong TV. We had an amazing set of interviews with industry professionals to give you the inside scoop into the tech world. And alongside an airing of Engineering the Change and an interview from Open Source Summit Europe, we had plenty of great content today. We'll be back again tomorrow, so we hope to see you then. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. As always, stay strong. Techstrong.